Welcome in. How many people were here last time? Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot. You don't have to remember any details. Just tell me what your takeaway was from the last time. How many people weren't here last time? Okay, so we got a few. Okay, so we're doing this series called Is Atheism Dead? It's based on this guy here who wrote a book. The book is called Is Atheism Dead? I basically just ripped off the artwork for here, for the thing. And so we're doing 3 weeks of it. This is a book I read over a year ago. Was so inspired by the information and was really inspired that I should share the information, but I just never really could figure out how until we got past our Answering Islam group and we said, hey, what do we want to do next? And this one came up. So that's why we're diving into it. Last session was great. Very informative, and everybody seemed to dive in really well. But just would love to do a little recap. I'm going to do a recap here, but I want to see what you guys remember. So who wants to go first? Just give us a little snippet of what you remember. Sharon.
What stands out to me is how perfectly God made everything.
Okay.
How everything's in the exact position and spot it should be in.
Yeah.
In order for us to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
So His sovereignty.
Okay. And anything specific you remember, or just that principle, which is great?
Just how we're in the galaxy, and we're kind of hidden. That really caught me. We're hidden in that little spot, so nothing can really hurt
Okay.
us.
Milky Way galaxy. Yep. Yeah. Amazing. Totally. Okay.
And we're on the right tilt.
And we're on the right tilt. Yeah. We're not off kilter.
Yeah.
Well, some of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, thank you for that honesty there, Nancy. Okay, anybody else?
I thought it was cool how, like, if you were just a little bit more to the right, then things would go crazy, or if you were a little bit more to the left, things would go crazy. Like, if it was like a couple degrees closer to the sun, then we would burn, we would not, we would freeze, or if the gravity wasn't as a little bit harder, we would fly, or be stuck to the ground. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just crazy.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's good. Those are two great points, great remembrances. Somebody else?
And that planet that's in the way, that's taking asteroids?
Oh, Jupiter. Yeah, the linebacker for the that's right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Laurel? Any?
Also Texas, there's craters and everything on that.
Oh, that's right. Moon Texas. Yeah. For sure.
And everything else got taken over.
And what?
Everything else got taken over.
Okay. Anyone else? Luke, what do you got?
So everything is so fine-tuned
Yep.
that the possibility that the Big Bang Theory is a theory just blows that out of the water.
Right.
It's that fine-tuned. That's how perfect everything is put together through God.
And great use of that terminology, because that's the terminology they're using. Yeah, it's great.
And the universe is continuing to grow, and
Yeah.
we're able to get back to the original timeline for the
Right.
or whatever.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, that was something we actually talked about, that Einstein, who, when he figured out relativity and all these things, he actually decided not to put that thing in his equation, because up to that point, everybody thought the universe was a solid state universe. It just existed as was. It wasn't moving, it wasn't developing, it wasn't growing. But when he noticed that, he didn't say anything, and he called that his greatest scientific blunder. And so the idea is that if it's growing, that means, again, like you said, it can be brought back to a point where there was a beginning. And so that's significant to science. Okay, Martha.
I like everything is so fine-tuned, as was said, that even the moon has effect on the tides.
Mm-hmm.
Like the ocean, the tide coming in and going out
Yep.
is all tied to
Yep.
the moon.
Yeah.
So it's just,
Yeah.
I watched it on YouTube, I wasn't here.
Okay.
So I just find all the information so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's just great.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Chelsea.
I agree. I did watch the view of it, and the fine-tuning, and the deeper it goes, it's just perfect. So
Yeah.
obviously there's
Yeah, in 1966, Asimov, I think his name was, he said that you only needed two things for there to be life. One was a star, the right kind of star, and the second thing was the appropriate distance from that star. So he kind of was on pace for learning about fine-tuning. Some of you have already talked about that, just that proximity and stuff. And if our star was much bigger, or if our star was much smaller, it would all change. It would change everything. But since then, since 1966, we've found hundreds of things, which you have all mentioned here tonight. And so it's hard to imagine that everything just happened by chance when you're coming across all of these evidences that without it being just so, that the world would not exist. So tonight, what we did last session, is we looked into the universe, the galaxies, the cosmos, all of that. We looked out into the bigness of the fine-tuned universe and all those things. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to turn our eyes inside. And we're going to look at microbiology, specifically something called apiogenics, which is the creation of life. So I was going to do a whole big thing here because I didn't put any trust in you. I thought, oh, they're not going to remember anything. I will literally review everything, but you really have captured a lot of it. I will start out just by saying as well that I'm not a scientist and I'm not an expert. So I'll just throw that out there. And like I need to tell you guys, but I'm just saying that. The second reason why I want to do this is because of the proliferation of science in our culture. And what Metaxas's premise is that since 1953, we'll see it here, 1952, a couple of experiments that came along, and then this Time magazine article, Is God Dead?, really came by way of scientific discoveries. All started back with Darwin. And if we follow the breadcrumbs, we started to put our faith in science, and to this day, we put our faith in science. And we'll trust science, we'll trust what the doctors say, we'll trust what the scientists say. What does every commercial say? What from, deodorant to toothpaste to laundry detergent, 7 out of 10 scientists have proven, right? And so everything in our culture has been kind of camping on this idea that science is real. And then the problem with that is that science doesn't believe in creation, doesn't believe in God creating the heavens and the earth and us. And so really it's a pushback against that, and it's an answer to the proliferation of science in our society. And then the third reason that I'm sharing this is essentially because Eric Metaxas is the same reason why he wrote this book. And the reason he wrote the book was because he started to learn this stuff, and he goes, how come I'm not hearing this anywhere? I've never heard any of this stuff. So unless you go digging, it really doesn't come to you, this type of information. And so that's why we wanted to cover it. Okay, so let me just scroll and get past, and I'll join you guys. I've given you empty sheets, and you can fill this out as we go along. There's no answers for you on the screen, so you have to write them in for yourself. I do have a couple of videos that I want to show you, and just be prepared to have your minds absolutely blown. If you don't know any of this stuff and you learn it tonight, you're just going to walk out of here like, I actually can't believe it. And it's one of those things where when you look out into the cosmos, it's hard to get your mind around how far planets are, how far stars are, how big galaxies are. You just can't, the mind can't comprehend. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to go into microbiology and into cellular structures and into abiogenesis, which is about the beginning of life. So, back to you. Here is, I'm going to throw this out. How do you know something is alive? What are characteristics that you would describe something being alive?
Growth.
Growth? Okay, great. Yeah, that's one of them. Actually, I have that as number 6. Did I put 8 on your list?
Yep.
Okay. I might only have 7 for you. But growth is definitely one of them. Growth and development, 100%. You know, think about something like a rock or the chair. The chair is going to be that same size. It's going to be that same knowledge. It's going to have the same emotional state for the entirety of its life until it goes to landfill. But for us, hopefully, we grow in multiple ways. Okay, perfect. Something else?
Breathing.
Hmm?
Breath, like breathing or something.
Breathing. Okay. Yep.
Breathe.
Okay.
Able to reproduce.
That's a good one. Replication. So living organisms, including the cells that we're going to talk about tonight, all reproduce incredibly. Billions of times per day, in fact. Okay, somebody else? Anything else you got? That's number 2 on the list. That's number 2 on my list. You can put it wherever you want. Anything else?
Movement.
Say again?
Movement.
Movement, okay. Okay. Maybe I'll join you, Martha. What I have here is response to stimuli, right? So response to stimuli. If you put a hand on a hot burner, you can move your hand. You know, if something is dead, it doesn't do that. If you put a block of wood on a burning element, it will just be engulfed into flame. It won't be able to respond to the stimuli. Okay. Let me go down. I'll go down the list. So starting with number 1. Number 1 is metabolism. Metabolism. So the sum total of the biochemical reactions occurring in an organism is called metabolism. So it's the fact that our cells, and Chelsea, you mentioned breath, and the reason I didn't kind of jump on it for the list was because inside the cells, there's this metabolic thing that's just going freaky all the time, and it's, you know, it doesn't involve breathing, but metabolism is one, replication is one. Laurel, you mentioned that. Number 3 is organization, cellular organization. So it's a big part. It's organized for life. Number 4, Martha, you mentioned movement, and so response to stimuli. You know, all of us on a rainy day will run for cover. You know, on a hot day, we'll go for the shade. You know, on a cold day, we'll kind of, you know, try to maintain our body heat. A response to stimuli. But then also, there's a homeostasis. And I'll allow you guys to spell that yourselves. Spell it phonetically if you want. Homeostasis. Homeostasis. This is the idea of, you know, if you spike a fever, there's something wrong. And so your body will always want to stay at the same temperature. Your body will always, you know, we tend to stay in this idea of homeostasis.
Against balance.
Say again?
Keeps your body balanced.
Say again?
Keeps your body balanced.
Keeps your body balanced. Okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah, balance. Yeah, that's good, right? Like if you ate too much, you know, acidic food or something like that, or, you know, ate too much of the wrong food, or just constantly ate one thing, you would upset that, and your body would crave that homeostasis, okay? And then the other thing is self-repair. Self-repair. So this is something that is amazing to us that God has built into our DNA, into the way we work. If we cut ourselves, our body heals ourselves. And that's amazing. We don't even give that a thought. We put a Band-Aid on it, maybe put some hydrogen peroxide on it so we don't get an infection. But then your body's like, I'll take care of it. And your body will bring it hopefully back to brand new. Okay, so there's 7 things. You know, some would say it's more like the 3 or the 5, and then other people add a whole bunch of things. I just thought, really what we should do is define what a living cell is before we start, because I want to answer this next question, which is question 1. And this question 1 is not what we're going to talk about tonight, but it's really often where most people go with this argument. And so question 1 is, how did the world's indescribable variety come to be? Right? So just look around this room, all shapes and sizes. I mean, there's all kinds of variety just in this room. But if you think about bugs, I think there's 900,000 different species of bugs. There's 400,000 different species of plants. all kinds of animals, all kinds of trees, different varieties and different climates, and all kinds, like the world is so awesome with variety, right? And so how did this variety come to be? How did we go from an invisible single cell to, and then this is Eric Metaxas's reference, to hippopotami and butterflies. You want to talk about variety? Well, there's some good contrast. So, 2 theories. What do you got?
Nature versus nurture.
Nature versus nurture? Okay. Well, I'll go with the nature, right? The nature being evolution, right? It's just like, yeah, we were that invisible cell at one point, and that cell divided, and then it became this, and then that divided, and then it became that, and then it kept on dividing, and then we got all of the variety that we have to this day. One theory.
Adaptation through necessity for the environment.
Okay, so kind of back to the nature. Yeah. Okay, and anybody want to throw the easy answer out there? Creation. Thank you. I was just like, oh, okay. We got a lot of work to do because nobody wants to say Jesus, right? It's, I know the answer is Jesus, but I'm going to say. Yeah, so we come to that, right? And that's the big debate has been for a long time, did we evolve from apes, or did Jesus say, I'm going to make man in my image? Right? And so you have these 2 theories. So that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. Because what we're going to talk about tonight is actually more valuable and more important, and it is the something that most people never talk about. They will talk about this all day long and have their theories and have their opinions and all of those things, but what we're going to talk about tonight is even more important, which is the abiogenesis. Okay? So here's the next question. This is the one I want you to answer. What happened to bring life into existence in the first place? Okay. Love that, because that goes with theory number 2, I guess, as we answered it tonight.
God's breath.
God's breath. Okay. Yep. If you were thinking from an evolutionary standpoint, what would you say?
Bang.
Okay. Bang and life and what?
Matter.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Matter.
Matter.
Okay.
Energy is never created or destroyed. It just exists.
Okay.
Therefore, that whole atmosphere has been here, and then, this God created the poof. I don't know.
So did God create or just matter? Because here's the
God is matter.
here's the dilemma, right? The dilemma is we just defined life as having a metabolism, having a replication effect to it, cellular organization, response to stimuli, homeostasis, growth and development, self-repair. So if you're from an evolutionary standpoint and you have a cell where you have some components of a cell that get together, what brings them to life? What'd you say? Mystery. Okay. Okay. Well, here's what I will tell you about what I learned in the book. This guy here. This guy here is Urey. This is called, in 1952, this is called the Miller-Urey experiment. And so these guys in 1952, that's a pretty fancy picture, hey? 1952, they took water, I think it's in your notes, water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. Their premise was, if the world came from a big bang and the universe exploded, Earth came here, and then over billions of years, millions of years, the Earth cooled, water formed, and in the water were these 4 components: water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. And then their premise, because how do you make that jump from something being dead and lifeless and just matter? How does it become life? How does it become self-replicating, self-repairing, How does it all of a sudden grow? That is a mystery. So their premise was, if you took these four things, and the idea was that they thought there was electricity involved. And so they thought, okay, there's lightning in the sky, the lightning hit the water at just the right time, and these four components came together, and they would form something called life. Okay? So, you got the concept in your head. So they do this experiment multiple times, and in 1952, they create, by this experiment, an amino acid. I think, what is there, 15 amino acids? Maybe more? I can't remember exactly how many. But they created an amino acid. And so they are the heroes. They become they win the Nobel Prize for Science because they have literally created a life-giving organism. It's this moment that science has taken and run with, and it's this moment whereby now we put all our trust in science, because for all intents and purposes, they've created life. The problem is that they didn't. The second problem to that is that since that day in 1952, they've done nothing further to change anything. The science is still the same. And we'll talk about this at the end. As much as everything else has changed, the internet, satellites, everything has changed. That has not changed. So this was the assumption, that in 1952, the general idea was that was the beginning of an event. How life was created was completely settled. Science had answered the question. And their conclusion, this is the conclusion that they came to. This is probably the conclusion that is rattling around in your head, even though you push it aside because you believe that God created the heavens and the earth from the Bible. Their conclusion was that randomness over time could do anything. Randomness over time could do anything. God is not necessary for life, but life could arise out of non-life by random processes. Where did we get that? If you dial that all the way back to Darwin, Origin of Species, remember Galapagos Islands, and he sees birds with different beaks, and they're all kind of figuring out how to get their food, and so they're changing biologically and evolving or adapting over time, and this thing called natural selection. So what they did was they joined up this idea that, hey, we can make life, or an amino acid, in a petri dish by shooting electricity into those four components. And so the idea is, just like Darwin's theory of natural selection, if we give that little amino acid enough time, it will eventually become a human being. All you need is time. Okay? So the fundamental problem was solved, but our conclusion is, or the conclusion that I think we should come to, is that has anyone ever checked this out? Has anyone ever kind of gone back and done any research and gone, well, okay, well, now what? We're going to see a guy who's done that in just a minute. But the important thing that I want you to know is that since 1952, which is over 70 years ago, they have not moved the ball down the field one more step. So what they've done there and all the prizes that they got for it and all the notoriety, it really has stayed there. So I have a little quote here. It says, "Science has discovered and learned so much since 1952 from what we originally understood that to hold our conclusions is much harder than we originally thought." So the reason I'm going to say that is this. So they figured that out in 1952, and they make a grand assumption, which is the assumption that we talked about. The problem is science has developed astronomically since then. We've learned so much. We know so much more. We've been able to use microscopes and figure all kinds of things out. We have computers now. Science has just exploded with all kinds of data, which has turned the clock back on these guys who decided they figured out how to create life in 1952. Okay, you with me on that? So you think this is a stepping stone, but really it actually becomes a point in time where science actually expands and points back to that this really is meaningless at the end of the day. Somebody said that it was almost as like they moved the ball, or the ball has not moved down the field, but because of the developments in science, the goalposts are now galaxies away. So there's no way you could ever use this principle to kick a field goal. So the evolutionists, or as we say here, the atheists, have two significant problems that they have to answer, and it's based on all this scientific knowledge we've had since 1952. Number one is the discovery of what a cell is. So a cell, as far as I know, again, remember I'm not a scientist, a cell will have amino acids in it. I think there's 15 amino acids, so a cell will have amino acids in it, but a cell is not, or an amino acid is not a cell. It's just part of a cell, and there's all kinds of parts to a cell. A single cell organism is inconceivably more complex than originally thought. So, and even if this is not hyperbolic, scientists will say that a single cell is more complex than any machine man has ever made. A cell. They will say that a cell is basically like a factory for all intents and purposes. And so they've done some animated modeling, and so we're gonna see that in just a second. And this is different because in 1952, when they're doing this experiment that's on the screen for you, they just thought a cell is just a glob. It's just a glob of chemicals, right? They used to call it a protoplasm. I don't know if you ever heard that term, but it's a protoplasm, which is basically just a kind of a collection of goo, right? It's just a collection of goo that has all of the makings, all of the necessary things that life requires. Even at first glance here, the problem with that is that what creates the edges for that? Right? What even creates the edges for that? Why are they there? But of course that wasn't really in their headspace. But that was the concept of what a cell was back then. And now we've learned that a cell is basically like a little tiny factory in your body with all of your DNA in every single cell. Crazy, crazy stuff. So the idea, as we've understood DNA, RNA, and all of the other cellular compositions, it has just come to seem so preposterous that with a strike of lightning and 4 different particles, you could create life. Because how in the world would all of this stuff come to be and then work together? In terms of DNA, the DNA of a single bacteria is the equivalent of millions of words. That would be about 20 books worth of words. Just the information in that is a single cell in a bacteria. So we're talking the lowest of the low kind of forms of cells. 20 books of information just for that one cell. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just show you the video because I'm kind of a little bit beyond my depth in terms of describing this. But I want to come back afterwards and tell you about the guy who actually discovered, 1953, a guy named James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the DNA helix. And if you know anything about DNA, it's kind of the design of why you are the way you are and why you're a human being and not a dog or an elephant or a cat or a plant. And so in every living organism, there's this DNA. And so this guy, James Watson and Francis Crick in 1953 figured this out. And immediately they said, hey, you know what? This is kind of a blueprint type of thing, but don't think it's a God type of thing. So he kind of went back on it. But I have 2 videos here that I'm going to show you that will explain this way better than me. Actually, I'll show you this one first. what it's going to do is it's going to go right into the creation of DNA, and then it's going to kind of back itself out until you see the cell. This is how deep in your body. This is one human cell. I'm not going to play the whole video, and then I'll give you one where the guy will explain it all way better than me. All right, you ready for this?
These are tiny molecular machines, and they are doing this inside your body right now. To understand why, we have to zoom out. Every day in an adult human body, 50 to 70 billion of your cells die. Either they're stressed or damaged or just old. But this is normal. In fact, it's called programmed cell death. But to make up for all these lost cells, right now, billions of your cells are dividing, essentially creating new cells. And that process of cell division, also called mitosis, well, it requires an army of tiny molecular machines. So let's take a closer look. DNA is a good place to start, the double helix molecule we always talk about. This is a scientifically accurate depiction of DNA created by Drew Barry at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. If you unwind the two strands, you can see that each has a sugar phosphate backbone connected to the sequence of nucleic acid base pairs, known by the letters A, T, G, and C. Now the strands run in opposite directions, which is important when you go to copy DNA. Copying DNA is one of the first steps in cell division. Here, the two strands of DNA are being unwound and separated by the tiny blue molecular machine called helicase. Helicase literally spins as fast as a jet engine. The strand of DNA on the right has its complementary strand assembled continuously, but the other strand is more complicated because it runs in the opposite direction. So it must be looped out with its complementary strand assembled in reverse, section by section. At the end of this process, you have two identical DNA molecules, each one a few centimeters long, but just a couple nanometers wide. So to prevent the DNA from becoming a tangled mess, it is wrapped around proteins called histones, forming a nucleosome. These nucleosomes are bundled together into a fiber known as chromatin, which is further looped and coiled to form a chromosome, one of the largest molecular structures in your body. You can actually see chromosomes under a microscope in dividing cells. Only then do they take on their characteristic shape. Otherwise, the DNA is more strewn inside the nucleus. The process of dividing a cell takes around an hour in mammals, so this footage is from a time lapse. You can see how the chromosomes line up on the equator of the cell. Now, when everything is right, they are pulled apart into the two new daughter cells, each one containing an identical copy of DNA. Now, as simple as this looks, the process is incredibly complicated and requires even more fascinating molecular machines to accomplish it. So let's look at a single chromosome. One chromosome consists of two sausage-shaped chromatids, containing the identical copies of DNA made earlier. Each chromatid is attached to microtubule fibers, which guide and help align them in the correct position. The microtubules are connected to the chromatid at the kinetochore, here colored red. The kinetochore consists of hundreds of different proteins working together to achieve multiple objectives. In fact, it's one of the most sophisticated molecular mechanisms inside your body. The kinetochore is central to the successful separation of the chromatids. It creates a dynamic connection between the chromosome and the microtubules. For a reason no one's yet been able to figure out, the microtubules are constantly being built at one end and deconstructed at the other. While the chromosome is still getting ready, the kinetochore sends out a chemical stop signal to the rest of the cell, shown here by the red molecules, basically saying this chromosome is not yet ready to divide. The kinetochore also mechanically senses tension. When the tension is just right and the position and attachment are correct, all the proteins get ready, shown here by turning green. At this point, the stop signal broadcasting system is not switched off. Instead, it is literally carried away from the kinetochore down the microtubules by a dynein motor. That's the walking guy. This is really what it looks like. It has long legs so it can avoid obstacles and step over the kinesins, molecular motors that walk in the opposite direction. Personally, I'm astounded by these tiny molecular machines, how they're able to routinely and faithfully execute their functions billions of times over inside your body at this exact instant. I'm also amazed by the scientists who were able to work out how this happens in such detail that we could create realistic depictions of them like you saw in the animations in this video. But perhaps the most amazing thing is just how much is left to be discovered, like figuring out how exactly the chromatids are pulled to opposite ends of the cell. There is still so much that we don't quite know. You know, what I find exciting is that in science fiction, for decades, we've been writing about tiny nanobots that will be injected into our bloodstreams that can heal us. But what this suggests, the existence of these tiny molecular machines inside us, it suggests that there isn't a physical limit that would prevent that. And so I think it's pretty likely that in future, we will be able to develop our own tiny molecular machines that will be able to repair our bodies better than they can repair themselves.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? Well, Chelsea?
Well, I think it's fascinating. It's like I went to university for human genetics.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Chemistry, so this
Yep.
is like a little bit of a refresher.
Okay.
For university.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how intricate everything is, and we just have no idea.
Right.
Fascinating.
Right.
Still learning.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and yeah, I love it, because the point of that is not to understand it all, remember all those things. It's just like, yeah, again, the thought was that we're just this little tiny glob of something that divided magically, mysteriously. And it's like, yeah, no. yeah, no, one cell and all that's going on. How did that ever kind of a leap from non-life to life? It could only be by somebody actually putting all that together. This is what a cell looks like. It's going to divide multiple times and then become something unbelievable. Somebody else? What are your thoughts when you watch that?
I would have never thought.
Overwhelming. David, right? In I think it's in Psalm 139, and he says, "You knew me well in my mother's womb, when I was being knit together in my mother's womb." And I that's been kind of rolling over in my head as we've been, just watching this, and like that, the fact that the DNA is like stripped apart, and it's so close together, and for a cell it has to be all wound up. What do they say? However long it was, and then it fits in just a little tiny spot. But then when the cell wants to divide, it has to pull it all apart again. And so it separates it all up again, and then reproduces it, one from front to back and one from back to front. And it's like, wait a second, what's happening? And then when you think that that is happening 1 billion times every day in your body, you're like, okay, I'm lost. Like, I'm out. Like, I don't have enough to, but then we think it all happened by accident.
We have 46 of those little chromosomes in one cell in our body.
Right.
But it's actually 23 from mom and 23 from dad, which is kind of cool. You learn
Chromosomes.
more about it. So
Yep.
People go, it's in my genes. Well,
There it is.
where it comes from.
Yeah. So you can see now scientists, because they've, and this was really cool, I learned this too, that, we think that scientists are looking under a microscope. And this is so small that they don't look through a microscope. They have to use electrons. And the electrons actually do digital, they kind of read it like a record, because it's so small. So in order for them to see it, they have to look at it through a different type of microscope. And so when they figured that out, long past 1952, thank you very much, when they figured that out, all of a sudden they saw all this going on inside a cell. And then the beauty of animation is this guy's actually animated what it looks like to be in a cell. So any other thoughts or observations?
I'm thinking about the complexity and the uniqueness of everybody's DNA and how they're using that now in investigations to solve crimes from way back,
Absolutely, yeah.
right? And they didn't have that technology.
They didn't have that, no. Yeah, this is all brand new. So, the guy who figured out this guy right here, his name is Crick, Francis Crick. Get this, okay? So, it's all of a sudden not lightning striking water with 4 elements that's going to create life. They figure out that there's actually kind of like a plan. And he's the guy, him and this guy named James Watson, they discover the DNA helix. They're the ones that actually go, hey, there's a blueprint for everybody, and and we've discovered it. In his immediate response, he says, this is not what you think. The mysteriousness of design, don't assume a designer. So it's like, it looks like there's a plan here, but don't assume there's again, kind of like Einstein. Remember, Einstein didn't want to say that the universe was expanding because everybody would think he was a fool. These guys found this out, atheists, and they were like, well, we can't say this and then pretend that there's a maker, somebody who put all this design together. So they came out and said, don't assume a designer. So I think it was 1978, he was being interviewed, Francis Crick. And when he was asked about this abiogenesis, they're like, okay, so it's been whatever, 25 years since you figured out the DNA helix. So we still don't really know, like, how did we get life? Like, how did life start? And here his answer was, and this was serious, he said, maybe an alien came to Earth anonymously and left it. Like, this is a Nobel Prize winning scientist going aliens, right? And so he says, he called it directed panspermia. Directed panspermia. So you're like, okay, this is less proof than you got with the DNA helix, man. Like, you got nothing to go on. You're just out on a limb. And so here's the thing that Metaxas says. He goes, so this is all well and good. And he can say this if he wants, and we can't disprove it. Maybe aliens did. Maybe aliens did bring, if you want to go down the evolutionary bunny trail and you want to say, oh yeah, aliens came here and they had life. It asks you two questions. Number one, where did they get their life? Right? Number two, how did they get here? Number three, it still doesn't tell us how life began. We're still no further ahead, and so even with that, it was just absolutely absurd. Okay, so in terms of non-matter coming to life, there are no answers, but we certainly know because of the complexity of a cell, it didn't just happen by accident. It wasn't just all of a sudden, oops, the amino acid fell into the water and then the lightning struck, and all of a sudden now we have people. We know because of the complexity. That's not an option. Like, you just saw that. That's one cell out of a billion, and you have trillions in your body? No, sorry, off the table. Number two is time is the enemy. Time is the enemy, and so we're gonna kind of lean onto a guy named James Tour, and I'm gonna show you a video in just a second. And James Tour is the leader in all of this study and all of this background stuff. In fact, I think Metaxas got most of his stuff from this next point from James Tour. You may have actually seen him on YouTube. If you kind of do the YouTube rabbit trails and you go down the trails of, science and God and all those kinds of things. He's a very devout Christian, very outspoken. He throws out challenges to all the scientists saying, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong that this all wasn't created. But nobody will take up the challenge because at this point they still can't figure out where life came from. So again, we're back to this little glob of goo that turns into a person. And the premise that could happen if you had millions and billions of years. So if you had millions and billions of years, the right combination should come along at some point, lightning would strike, and then we would get started. Okay, so again, that's probably rattling around in my brain, rattling around in our brains as well. So it's this idea that the need for long extended periods of time creates the notion of limitless possibilities that anything could have taken place if given enough time. Anybody, does that ring true to you? You're kind of like, oh yeah, somebody told me that one time. And that's why, with evolution, they always talk about 14 billion years ago. So here's his point. He says the problem with this is that organic cells degrade rapidly if left under the same condition they were formed. So if you did have a cell and it was living and it was just left there, it probably would only last hours, days, weeks, maybe, but it would certainly deteriorate over time. And so his point is that time doesn't help you. If you have a billion years, that doesn't help you at all. Because this has to happen quickly. If you think about that, just think about a banana, right? You bring a banana home, well, you got to eat that sucker within a week. Otherwise, it's going in the freezer and you're going to make banana bread sometime because that thing's going to degrade, right? It's the same with cells, right? It's the exact same with cells. So he says, this is a quote, he says, and I think he says it in the video as well. He says, unless there's someone there to fish them out, the cells, to stop the process and to put them in a bottle, they go away as quickly as they come into being. So when you think about that debunks the notion that just given enough time, that these cells would replicate. So his other point is if a random process somehow miraculously succeeded to form a carbohydrate, the random process, they don't know how to do it again. So if it was to happen once, miraculously, if somehow all of that happened one time, well, how would you do it again? Like how, right? And then his whole point is that say you do it again and you get down the road, but you run out of materials. You run out of things that you need to keep on doing the thing. well, then everything falls apart, and now you got to start back at the beginning to do it all again. But you're kind of like, what were we doing? And also, why were we doing this? It just leans back into the purposelessness and this whole idea that matter is just matter, and it's hard for it to become, have life that we explained at the beginning. So his point is that time doesn't solve anything. Kind of like that first premise we had, the more we learn about science, the more it disproves that original notion that we could create life. Same thing here. We think, oh, if you just have enough time. He's like, no, time is your enemy. This all needs to happen quite quickly. What does that sound like? Right? And God said, right? I don't know about you, but it gives me a sense of inspiration. And again, I think about a 4,000-year-old scripture that we read and everybody goes, oh, that's just a folktale. And I'm like, yeah, well, it sounds like the folktale actually has it more right than your scientific alien theory. Anyways, I'm going to introduce you to James Tour here. And he will talk about this whole idea about time being the enemy of any of this stuff developing.
Some people argue that since there's been hundreds of millions of years available, the probability that there's the chance that these things could happen in hundreds of millions of years. But that's not true. Time actually can be an enemy when it comes to organic synthesis. Prebiotic synthesis is before biology. So one has to make chemicals. Many of the chemicals that need to be made for life are kinetic products, meaning that they're not the most thermodynamically stable form. For example, carbohydrates, which is the main class of compounds. These are the units that hook together DNA. These are the units that have identifying aspects on cell structure. These are the units that the cell is going to need for the energy of life. Carbohydrates are kinetic products, meaning that if they should form, they would decompose. They decompose over time. And relatively short amounts of time, they decompose. The very reactions that make them, unless somebody is there to pull them out, to fish them out, to stop the process and to put them in a bottle under inert conditions in a freezer. And not just one, there's many, many different types you have to do this. They end up going through a process of what's referred to as caramelization, meaning that they polymerize. They polymerize. The very aldol reactions that were used to make them just continue. And you get polyaldols, you get polycondensation reactions, and they caramelize. Or they undergo, with formaldehyde, which is a presumed prebiotic chemical, they undergo rapid Cannizzaro reactions. So the aldehyde is oxidized to formic acid, and this nice carbohydrate that you made has just been reduced. So the aldehyde from the carbohydrate has gone back to an alcohol. So there's competing reactions. So time does not solve the issue. The other problem is if you had 400 million years to get to a certain point in a synthesis of a particular class of compounds, now you run out of material. Anytime you do synthesis, you run out of material, even when you've optimized the yields, and you got to go back to the beginning. Well, say it took you 400 million years to get to a certain point on a synthesis. Now you have to go back and make more. But how do you go back and make more? Because nature never kept a laboratory notebook. Doesn't know how to go back. Never kept a record. So even if it could make more, it doesn't know how to, so it's got to start all over again somehow. But it doesn't know how to start over again. It doesn't know why to start over again because it doesn't know what it's going toward. So if you look at it, people have been trying for a long time. If we just take Miller-Urey as the first example, where Miller and Urey took some basic chemicals that are presumed on a prebiotic earth, hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, and CO2, and they put those across a high voltage, simulating lightning, you can get some racemic amino acids out of those. But those racemic amino acids were racemic. Okay, that was in 1952. That was 2/3 of a century ago. What's happened in 2/3 of a century since since Miller-Urey in other fields? Well, we've had human space flight. We have satellite connectivity. We have the internet. We have the entire silicon era of microchips, and we have computer technology. We have all of this. In the same 66 years, 2/3 of a century, we are still exactly where Miller and Urey were. We make a barrage of stereo-scrambled chemicals, nowhere close to even knowing how to make them and hook them together. They got to get hooked together in the proper order. We are clueless on this, clueless, because time doesn't solve this. Even with all our ingenuity, time is not going to solve the problem. You let these chemicals that have been made, you let them sit around, even for months, and you can look even in the origin of life researchers themselves. When they've let these go for weeks, they show the degradation of these in a period of weeks. Weeks is the twinkling of an eye when it comes to prebiotic timescales. The chemicals decompose. The environment for the chemicals, environment rich in ammonia, is going to turn carbonyls into imines. These are going to cause further destruction. The ammonia environment itself is quite basic. You're going to have extended aldol reactions coming on. So to think that the molecules could be made and sit there waiting for other molecules to come in, it doesn't happen. Organic chemistry doesn't work that way. Any student that is lazy enough to set up reactions and like to go home for the weekend without working them up pays the price for that, with a depressed yield generally. As soon as the reactions are done, or as soon as what you want is the optimized yield, you have to stop that reaction, get it away from the starting materials, or else what happens is it goes on to polymerized product. Especially when you're making kinetic products, which is not the thermodynamically most stable product, which is exactly what you get in many of the chemicals that are needed for life. So time is actually the enemy.
So I feel like with his words, man, his word salad there was just as bad as the visual salad that we saw when all the DNA, he's like, those are a lot of words I've never heard before. So I don't know what kind of vocabulary this guy, but he's pretty passionate. He knows it. You know, he actually runs he's at Rice University, he runs two departments. One is in microbiology as it pertains to computers, because you know how everything in computers is really tiny and small. So he works on that end of things, so that kind of technology. But then he also is working on, remember the guy said, we're looking for little devices that we can put in that are small and they can come into our body and they can fix different things in our body. He's the guy that's working on that. So he has, obviously it's not ready yet, but whatever, he's been working on this thing where he's designed these little cars, and the cars are about as big as a cell, and you can inject them into your body, and they can go and they can travel around your body and do various thuses and so's, and so that's what he's working on. So pretty crazy stuff. So what? Did you take anything away from that little clip there, other than he was yelling at us a lot, just yelling?
Very passionate.
Yeah. Anyone?
Time is our enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And I got the same as, there's a specific order, same as creation.
Right.
Heaven and the earth.
Right. Absolutely. You mentioned that last week as well, right? That God, when it's documented in Scripture, all of the order makes a complete logical sense. If he was I'm going to create man. Okay, now where do I put him? Okay, hang on a second, Adam. But he didn't. He created everything perfectly. And it just stands to reason that he would have done everything else perfectly and in order as well. Yeah.
It reminds me of he created the world, so those little cells kind of reminds me of how he created the world, with all those little robots coming in and fixing this and that and the other to make it work. Same as God, when he created heavens and earth, everything had to be specific, the stars and everything, oxygen and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember at the beginning I said, well, it's probably not as kind of overwhelming as the whole space, galaxies, universes stuff, but it's almost the same way, just the other direction, isn't it? Like when you get right down into what's going on inside a cell and DNA and the replication and all of that stuff, it's it's hard to kind of, small as it is, hard to get your mind around. Yeah. So anecdotally or spiritually, is there an application that you're making here? Okay, yeah, God is into the fine details. Okay. Somebody else?
I don't know how they can be so smart, but they are so dumb. They sound so smart, but still kind of not smart, making use of everything that's already in creation and says there's no creator because the water was just there. The metal was found. The ammonia was found, hydrogen, electricity. Even they themselves, they're trying to prove this
Right.
existence.
Yeah.
So you're making use of a whole lot of existence, and you're saying something did not make them exist. It's just a very unsmart way to think you're smart.
Yeah.
It's the dumbest.
Yeah. Would it be arrogance? Would you say it's like just arrogance?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
They're so dummy arrogant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the one.
Okay. Yeah. I love that. It reminds, just a sec, Luke, it reminds me of the old joke where the man goes to God and he goes, "Yeah, I can create things too. I can create life and, all this kind of stuff, just like you. Like I'm just like you. I can do all that kind of stuff." And God's like, "Oh yeah? Well, go ahead, show me." And so the man reaches down into the dirt and picks it up, and God goes, "Oh, no, hang on a second. You got to get your own dirt."
Exactly.
Yeah, right, like get your own dirt and then we'll talk. Yeah. Yeah, Job 38 and 39. I think did I mention this past Sunday? About God says, "Hey, where were you when I created and formed, and where did I, that's exactly the point." Luke?
I think as I'm watching him chat about how impossible the idea of no God is, I think, whether it's scientists or people, even in this general conversation, knowingly or unknowingly, there's this fleshly rebellion, because if they were to concede that there is in fact a God, then there is right and wrong, there is, good and evil, and people, again, knowingly or unknowingly, are not ready or unwilling to face that hard truth.
100%. 100%. Yeah. I totally agree with that. I think that's what it boils down to, pride, right? Boils down to pride and not wanting to admit that God is God. Which I do find fascinating, because the entire scientific process, we talked about this a little bit last week, the entire scientific process came out of the drive that people who were smart saw what was happening in the sky, they saw what was happening on the earth, and they were like, there's so much order here, there must be a creator, that must be the avenue where we can know him better. But it has turned on its head, and now it's back the other way, where now they're using science, and instead of saying, well, there's a God, they're saying, oh no, aliens came and dropped off life. Because I don't want to have to believe this. Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe it's too confusing. Yeah, it's a great point. Someone else? What are you just taking away from this, just like in your spirit, in your heart?
It's hard to believe the scientist after what he said there about the evidence.
Right?
I mean, there's wisdom, right? That's man's wisdom.
Yeah.
We can create this, and this, but it came from aliens.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like some of you in this room are probably old enough for the days before Google, when you would go to your doctor and that would be it. Like whatever your doctor said, rightly or wrongly, it was like, no, doctor said, right? But now we go, Google MD or whatever it is, or AI, it's like, well, I have a rash. Where's your rash? It's on my neck. Okay. You're going to die. You know what I mean? Like, right? But you go to your doctor and the doctor says, oh, it's just a rash, I'll just give you an antibiotic, you'll be fine. You're like, I'm still gonna go home and look it up on Google, right? Like, so it's this whole like cultural thing, but by the same token, I think inside of us and in our school and our education system, we're this is what's brought to us, right? And it's all based on, well, again, what Metaxas is saying, it's based on Darwin. It's based on this Miller-Urey test. It's based on 1966, is God dead? Because science has disproved a creator. And so all of that is kind of in us. And that's why for me, like the thing that I take away is just a confidence. Like and almost obnoxiousness of, don't you dare tell me that I've checked my mind at the door and that the God I believe in, isn't just as, strong an argument. There's not just as strong an argument for the God I believe in than there is for your hocus pocus. Right? So I remember reading the book and just being like, my faith just being so strengthened and encouraged by it, because it really just gave a foundation to the faith. Because again, let's face it, we don't know this, and if you don't know it and people come at you with the questions and you don't have answers, you're kind of like, yeah, well, how did we get life? I'm not really sure, oh yeah, and all of these things just developed on their own over time. It's like, well, we just learned that time is actually the problem, it's not the answer. And so, it just builds your faith, right? Somebody else? Observation, thought, question? Bible verse? I was trying to think of Bible verses while I was standing here, or sitting there going, what are the verses about life? And I think that would be it'd be great to kind of meditate on some of those over the next couple of days. Right?
Something, his thoughts are higher than ours.
Yeah.
And the mind of God.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Isaiah, right? Yeah. His ways are higher, his thoughts are higher. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I got a tickle. And I think of that Job passage too, where it's like, if you read it, Job starts pushing back against God, and God comes back and just goes, sorry, who are you? I think it was Sunday, because then I mentioned the potter, or was it 2 weeks ago? And the clay can't say to the potter, and again, to your point, like we're just the clay, like we're just, molecules here, and we're trying to kind of deduce or speak back to God that we know something, or that we're all special. Well, we are special, but just in a different way. Yeah. Chelsea.
I like how it, I don't know how to put it into words, but how it describes the feelings in a sense of, they're alive and they're real, and no matter what, someone's always going to question it, someone's always going to believe in it. So it's the constant battle for the rest of life. People are going to try to disprove God. Yeah. It's going to disprove them.
Yeah.
It's another universal law that, everything works in a full circle. So.
Yeah. I'm thinking about that verse, I think it's in Galatians, that says, in him we live and move and have our being, and I'm thinking about just the idea of resurrection life, right? The idea of resurrection power. And if you go down that road, you could totally do a study on the blood, right? Which is, there's life in blood, and the fact that, the oxygen comes into your lungs, and then your lungs, oxygenate your heart so they can pump blood through your body so that you can have life in your body. And when you just think about that element of it being life, and then the fact that when God wanted there to be covering for sin, it was about blood, the shedding of blood, right? Which represents death. And so it's this idea, this connection to death, and this idea that without the shedding of blood, you're dead. Like, you're dead in your sin. And then Jesus to come along, the creator of all of this, to come along and say, I will give my life and my blood for you so that you can live again, but then also I'm going to rise from the dead. It's pretty spectacular. It's pretty spectacular.
And it seems God knew human how to put things on time and, lack of time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure the Bible verse, but as a Bible verse, I know a day in the life, a million years in our sight
Oh yeah,
is a day
yeah,
in the sight of God. It's there in the Bible. Right? I
yeah.
don't
The
know
day of the
how-
Lord is of 1,000 years.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
because God already knew this thing I created.
Yeah.
You're gonna come back and like want to think is all just random. It's about
Yeah.
time.
yeah,
But whatever you do, it's just like this in my sight. So
Yeah.
who created the time we think is time?
Yes.
The timer itself.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how to speak the English.
yeah,
It's just a time of a time that I know is a time of a time. So why you
yeah.
thinking your time is,
Right.
that's how complete the Bible is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're making complete sense. And again, it always boggles my mind because we think of the Bible as a here and now book, which it is. But when you think about the fact that, like the creation passage was written, 3,000-4,000 years ago? Long before the Miller-Urey experiment, long before any of this stuff. And sure, it was all encoded and it was all kind of poetic and whatever, but it makes sense. And it's that old. Yeah, I don't know. I just get this feeling of humility. I get this feeling of connection to God. It kind of makes sense in my mind, which kind of aligns with my heart and my spirit. And I'm just encouraged. I'm encouraged by it. My faith is emboldened and strengthened. So I hope yours is too. Don't miss the next week. We won't be talking science at all. I think we've had enough science for a generation. But next week, what we go through is, I think it's 5 or 6 different archaeological finds that back up the Bible.
Is that next week or 2 weeks?
2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks. So again, we talked about this in our Daniel series. Remember in the Daniel series, in chapter 5, Daniel, they're having this feast, and a man named Belshazzar is having this feast, and he gets drunk, and he says to his buddies, "Hey, let's go down to the temple, and we're going to grab all the Jewish goblets and plates and stuff for their worship, and we're going to have some sport, and we're going to party with all of their special items." And so they do this, get all the stuff, and then there's the handwriting on the wall. Remember this? And it's all encoded. And they're like, what in the world is this? And so the guy, Belshazzar, calls the queen and says, when the queen was an older lady, and says, what does this mean? And she says, well, I know a man, and he was an interpreter of dreams. And of course, Daniel, the book of Daniel is all spread out. But, Daniel was an old man as well. And so he's probably in bed early, and they were partying. And so they go get Daniel, and he comes in his house coat. What do you need? There's that thing on the wall. And so he reads the thing on the wall, and he says that, you've been found wanting, and your soul is going to be required of you tonight. And so that happens. And that's in history. Because, Cyrus the Great comes and he takes over that night. The Bible, what is it, 2,700 years ago, documents that night. Daniel was in the building and he wrote it down. This is mind-boggling stuff, because it was the change of empires, and the servant of God is there. The problem is, for years, archaeologists had said, well, this is kind of, it's cute and it's whatever, but Daniel was probably written a whole lot later, because there was never a king named Belshazzar. Right? Never a king named Belshazzar. And so for years they were like, well, it's kind of cute, but it's off, because the other king was Nabonidus. The king was Nabonidus, and we never heard of a guy named Belshazzar. Until they did an archaeological dig, and they found the Nabonidus cylinder. And on the Nabonidus cylinder, it talks about Nabonidus going away for a decade or more, I think it's 12 years, and leaving his empire in the care of Belshazzar. And when people read that, they're like, oh, the Bible was true all along. There really was a guy named Daniel, and he really was in the room. And Belshazzar really did mess up really bad. And, when you read that stuff, and they kind of just want to attack the Bible, and then you get something like that. So there's a few more of those next week, so it's kind of cool. And it's lots of stories and stuff. So. Anyways, let me pray, and we'll end tonight. God, thanks so much for all you are and do. And Lord, thank you for the way that our faith is built on even some of these really hard to understand concepts, scientific principles, and all of these discoveries that have been made. And Lord, it just goes to show that our trust in you, Lord, our commitment to you, our dependence on you, our love for you, Lord, it's not a fool's errand, as the world would sometimes say to us. And Lord, but you are rock solid. Lord, you are the truth. Here it is. You are the way, the truth, and the life. You are the way, the truth, and the life. And so tonight we just commit ourselves afresh and anew to you. We thank you for this information. We pray that you would allow us to be built up in our faith so that we could glorify you. Lord, serve others and tell others about you. Go with us now, we pray, with a blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, thanks for being here, everybody.